What's up, Gabe Plugas here from defaultkings.com, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to overcome cravings. Now, the first thing I need you to know is that your cravings have nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with a need for emotional control. And if that sounds like a bold or controversial statement, or you're like, I have no idea how that makes any sense, because I'm pretty sure I'm hungry when I have cravings, then just watch to the end of this video, because what I'm going to teach you is things that I teach my clients inside defaultkings.com. In case you've never heard of us, if you haven't seen me on Twitter yet or somewhere else on the internet, what we do at defaultkings.com is we teach Christian entrepreneurs how to lose fat and keep it off. So we teach them the fat loss, we teach them the working out, of course, but we also teach them the biblical principles that help them have the mindset shifts necessary to be consistent. And part of that is overcoming cravings. And 100% your cravings are not because you're hungry, okay? They are not because you are hungry. And so in this video, we're gonna dive into what is really going on with your cravings. Because once you understand what's going on, you'll understand how to beat them, how to overcome them, so that you can not just lose fat temporarily, but you can keep it off long term. So, cravings versus hunger. The first thing to understand is that there is a difference between the two. There's a difference between cravings and physical hunger. Physical hunger, which I'll indicate with this hand, is the actual physical feeling of your stomach being empty. Physical hunger is the feeling of your stomach being physically empty. Okay, that's different than a craving. Okay, physical hunger is that feeling. Okay, a craving is the acute emotional desire for food. The acute emotional desire for food. Now, let's talk about hunger. Hunger is literally what's going on when your stomach's empty. It's been a while since you've eaten, or maybe you're fasting. And what happens is when your stomach is empty, and as your stomach empties, you secrete a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin. All right, the way I remember this is that ghrelin sounds like grr, and that's like your stomach rumbling when you're actually hungry. Grr, ghrelin has been secreted, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It's the hormone that tells you that your stomach is empty and you probably need to go find food. You probably need to go find food, okay? And the funny thing is that ghrelin, or actual physical hunger, is a lot easier to deal with than cravings, which is the acute emotional desire for food. That's why people can fast for really long periods of time. That's why even if you're overweight, you might have even tried some extended fasting and you can kind of handle it, right? You're like, I can handle hunger. I actually kind of like that feeling of being hungry. Fasting taught me that it's okay to be hungry, that I can manage hunger. And that's because it's nowhere near as intense as an actual craving, right? And yeah, a lot of people can endure hunger. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not the same as an intense emotional craving, okay? So hunger is the actual physical emptiness of your stomach, ghrelin's being secreted, and you can kind of deal with that for a period of time, right? Now, cravings are the acute emotional desire for food. These are the times where you desire a specific food and it seems to make no sense, and you're not even hungry, but you just want this thing, right? These are the moments where you feel stressed and you want to go stress eat. These are the moments where you get up from your desk in between calls and you feel like you just mindlessly wander to the kitchen and you don't know why, and you're just standing there staring at the fridge hoping to find something and you're not even hungry. Those are cravings, the acute emotional desire for food. Okay, so that's the difference, that's the delta that you need to understand first off. Now, in order to prove the statement to you that your cravings have nothing to do with your hunger, I want you to imagine the people who have the highest, most intense, most frequent cravings in the world. Okay, think about who would be the people who have the craziest cravings in the world. The people who would have the craziest cravings in the world are the people on My 600 Pound Life, okay? And if you've never seen the show, it's very intriguing. And I think the reason that it is a show in the first place is not because like people actually want to go stare at people who are 600 pounds, but it's because when you observe the people in My 600 Pound Life, you can tell that there is just something off in their heads. There is something off with them emotionally, I'd argue mentally and spiritually as well. And if you think about those people, they are constantly craving all the crappiest foods that you can possibly think of, right? They're constantly eating all the crappiest foods that you can think of. That's how they got 600 pounds. They have the highest amount of cravings. But those specific people who have the highest cravings are actually the ones who have the least amount of hunger. The people who have the highest cravings have the least amount of hunger. And you can, might be asking like, hey, how does that make any sense? Think about it. These are the people who are constantly eating. These are the people who are constantly over full. These are the people who are keeping their stomachs full. And therefore, although they're probably experiencing hunger at some points in time, they're not chronically hungry. Okay, they're not chronically dumping out ghrelin, but there's something off emotionally, spiritually, mentally, that is leading them to constantly having this acute desire for food that has nothing to do with hunger. Okay, it has nothing to do with how full they are. The people who have the highest cravings are the ones who are actually the most chronically full. Okay, right. So what does this tell us? What this tells us is that your cravings are not physical, they're not to do with hunger, and they're everything to do with a need for that emotional control. And the way we know that it has to do with a need for emotional control is because think about the foods that you actually crave. Okay, if cravings had to do with hunger, we would crave the most satiating, most filling foods that we can possibly think of. If it was all about being hungry, we would crave the foods that fill us up fast. So super satiating, filling foods. Potatoes, plain, baked, right? Air fried chicken breast or chicken thighs, right? Vegetables, salad, right? Raspberries, fruit, watermelon, right? These are the things that fill us up quite a bit. Lean meats, right? And those are the things that we're craving when we have cravings, right? We don't wake up in the middle of the night and think, you know what, man, like, I really feel like having some like baked chicken breasts. Right? We do not think that. We do not crave the most filling foods because it has nothing to do with being full. It has nothing to do with being hungry, right? Those aren't why we have cravings. The foods that we do crave are always actually the least filling foods. Okay, we crave the Oreo cookie that we can eat 50 of, right? We crave the ice cream that we can eat a gallon of. We crave the soda that we can drink a bunch of. We crave the cheeseburger that we can eat 2 of. We crave these things where there are so many calories packed into small amounts. We crave the least filling foods possible, okay? And really what's going on is if you look at the foods that we crave, Oreos, pizza, cheeseburgers, ice cream, all of those foods are combinations of nutrients that we would never find in nature. Okay, they're combinations of macronutrients that we would never find in nature. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is macronutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, alcohol is technically considered a macronutrient, which is why we also kind of crave that at times. That's a whole separate conversation though. But carbs, fats, and protein. In nature, what you're typically going to find is you're going to find foods that are combined of protein and fats, or just carbohydrates kind of on their own. Okay, protein and fats is like the animal meat that you'd find in nature, right? Like before all of the processed crap that was produced today, the only times you're finding fats and proteins in nature is when you're eating animal meat, right? And so that's natural, right? That's natural. That's something that our brains are used to finding in combination. Or you're finding carbohydrates on their own, right? You're eating leafy greens, you're eating grains, even eating breads, right? But that's something that you find on its own. It's just the carb in and of itself, or it's the fat and the protein combined with the animal meat. Now, when you look at the modern day hyper-processed, hyper-palatable foods, they're combinations of carbs and fats. And so the theory is that the actual, what's happening is, the mechanism that's happening is that when we consume carbs and fats together, like in the same bite, because that's almost never found in nature, we have a significant level of dopamine that is released when we consume carbs and fats together. Because that's something that we don't find in nature. And our natural reaction to that is, oh my gosh, here's a bunch of really energy dense food in one bite. I can eat a lot of it. So our brain perceives carbs and fats together as extremely rewarding, okay? Because it's a lot of energy dense, calorie dense, high calorie foods in a very small package, hyper palatable. We can eat a lot of it. And so our brain perceives that as rewarding. Think about a potato chip. Okay, potato chip, you can eat a whole bag of potato chips easily if you want, or French fries, McDonald's French fries, right? Carbs and fats together. Potato, carb, plus oil from being fried, carbs and fats together. Now you throw salt on top of that, then you could argue that there's even a dopamine hit from our brains perceiving that with that high amount of salt, high amount of carbs, high amount of fats, that we are going to be extremely hydrated as well while consuming a bunch of nutrients really, really quickly, right? Because you can imagine that if we were not in this modern world and we consumed a lot of nutrients really quickly together and we are able to hydrate ourselves really, really quickly with a potato chip, that's good. That's rewarding to our brain because it means we can store a bunch of energy. Stored energy, if you haven't made the connection at this point yet, is body fat. We can store a bunch of energy so that we can survive the winter. So it's rewarding to our brains to consume carbs and fats together, and you throw salt on top of that in some of these foods. Our brains have a massive dopamine hit. Our brains just go haywire, right? I mean, think about like the reaction that people make, you might make, when you taste something that's really, really, really good, right? Like think about a fresh baked chocolate cookie. Okay, that's melty and soft. It's a bunch of carbs, sugar, and fats put together, right? And you put the chocolate chip cookie in your mouth, and what's the reaction? The reaction is like, oh my God, that's so good, right? That's the reaction. And not to like be weird or creepy, but think about that face that you're making, that, oh yeah, like what does that sound like? Like that's almost the same reaction that you have when you orgasm during sex, right? Okay, we're all adults here, we can handle it, right? We work with Christian entrepreneurs. Sex is only for married people. That's prerequisite. But it's the same face, okay? And there's other things going on during sex, of course. There's a few other hormonal responses, but that reaction of, oh, yes, so good. Think about how intense of a reaction that is just when you eat something that tastes really good. That should be telling you the emotional response that your brain has when it eats those foods, right? And so when we have cravings, the point is that we're craving these types of foods that give us that type of emotional reaction, okay? Cookies, ice cream, carbs and fats, cheeseburgers, fatty cheeseburgers with fatty meat, not lean ground beef, which is always good. I eat like 10 burgers a week using lean ground beef. But the fat of the fatty ground beef plus the carbs of the bun, right? Pizza, the fat of the cheese and the pepperoni grease melting down with the dough, fats and carbs put together in one bite. Those are the foods that we crave. Okay, and of course there's a few exceptions here, right? But generally speaking, those are the foods that we crave. We crave the foods that give us a massive emotional response, a massive dopamine hit. And so what that tells us, we can deduce from that our cravings are when we actually crave a massive dopamine hit. We're not craving those foods specifically, we're craving a dopamine hit. We are subconsciously seeking out a dopamine hit. And dopamine is the reward hormone. It's the hormone that drives us to seek reward, right? That's what kind of is being secreted when we are perceiving that we're going to receive our reward, is dopamine. And so what we're actually seeking when we have cravings subconsciously is that dopamine hit. We're seeking that reward. That's why cravings have nothing to do with hunger, and they have everything to do with a need for that emotional control. Okay, they have everything to do with the need for that emotional control. If you don't believe me on this, you could test this if you want. I don't recommend testing it, but I've tested this where I've thought like, okay, if that's the theory, then what should happen when we combine like pretty much any carb and any fat is it should taste good, right? It should produce a dopamine hit. And I've tried this where like if you take like a fatty steak and put like jelly on it, like grape jelly or something like that, it sounds like two foods that'll never make any sense together. But the high fat of the steak plus the sugar, the high carbs of the jelly in one bite, that would taste really good. Like if you close your eyes and just put that in your mouth, you'd be like, whoa, that tastes like weirdly good. I didn't think that would taste good, right? Or if you take like peanut butter, this is actually a thing that restaurants sell now, but it sounds like it wouldn't go together, like peanut butter on a burger. That's something that actually tastes really good. The high fat peanut butter with the carbs of the ketchup and the bun in one bite, it tastes really good. It tastes really, really good. Peanut butter and honey. If you've never, like, I don't want to give you ideas, but I'm telling you, I've tested this just to test it. And any combination of carbs and fats together tastes really, really good. So hopefully that rounds out the point. That what cravings really are is when we're seeking out this dopamine, right? Cravings are all to do with a need for emotional control and nothing to do with hunger. And so with this awareness, you can kind of start to prepare, yourself to be able to handle cravings. And also you can prevent cravings from actually coming up, right? Things you can do to prepare yourself for handling cravings are you can just be aware of when you are experiencing negative emotion, when you're experiencing stress, when you're experiencing fear or anxiety. These are moments where you're susceptible to cravings, okay? This also explains why a lot of people experience, cravings late at night. That's because right before bed, as your brain is doing all this work and reflecting on the day, you subconsciously realize that if your life sucks or there's something in your life that's just slightly off or stressing you out, you didn't really receive reward, right? You didn't really receive reward. Your day was kind of bad. And so because your day was bad and you didn't receive reward, you're still seeking it out. And an easy way to get that sense of reward is through the hyperpalatable foods, is through satisfying your cravings. The cravings come up when you're seeking out reward, okay? And so you want to be able to manage your stress, especially towards the end of the day. And what this means is, practically speaking, like, I've had conversations with clients where they're experiencing these cravings late at night, and we find out that there's something in their life that's stressing them out like crazy, right? And so it's creating this stress eating sensation, this seeking out for cravings at the end of the day. Or it might just be that there's like even unaddressed conversations they haven't had with their wife, right? Where they're going to bed and they're pissed because they just got in a fight with their wife, right? Or they don't go to bed with her, right? And they wait till she goes to bed and they go smash food in the kitchen or eat the kids' snacks. They seek out that reward, that sensation of reward, because they haven't had it, right? We're seeking out that dopamine hit when we haven't yet had it, or when we think that we're not going to have it, right? Or people, after a hard day at work, what do? They stress eat, right? They stress eat. Gosh, I just need, like, I've heard people say they need emotional support burgers after hard, long days, right? Like, that's because you might have done something at work and maybe it was just a really hard day, so you didn't perceive reward at work, at least emotionally. Or you are in a line of work that you don't feel called to. Maybe you hate your job, or you hate your business, or it's just way too stressful. That's going to create this sense subconsciously of, I don't expect reward. I do not get reward, so I need to reward myself with food, right? This is exactly what happens when people go through this entire diet that is too restrictive and they never experience reward in that diet. And so they literally say consciously, I want to reward myself with food, right? And so the reason that we have cravings, okay, and the reason people binge at the end of their diets is because we're seeking out this sense of reward. We're not getting it in some way, shape, or form elsewhere. We're experiencing too much negative emotion elsewhere, okay? And so there's a few things that you need to do. Number one is you need to reduce the amount of negative emotion that you're experiencing. And of course, there are always stressors that you just can't control, but there are things you can control, right? And so you need to control the things you can control. If you're stressed out because your relationship with your wife sucks, have the conversations you need to have. Pray with your wife at the end of the night. Start having more sex with your wife and improve that relationship. It'll be one less thing that you're stressed about. One less thing where you're not perceiving reward. One more thing where you are getting reward, all right, in more than one ways. And if you can remove that stressor, you'll see that you'll have less cravings, okay? If there's something going on at work or in your business, address the issue. Like, fix your business. If your business sucks, get better at business. You'll be less stressed out. You'll have less cravings, okay? If you feel like you're working too long, delegate things. If there's somebody you don't like, I don't know, have conversations with them. Fix the actual controllables in your life so that you have less stressors and therefore have less of this need, this seeking out of emotional control through food. The other things you can do is, especially in the moments where you can't necessarily control the stress, when it's very external, is make sure that you deal with the stress in a positive way, okay? Stress, when we have that stress, when we have that negative emotion, stress can only do three things, okay, when we have it. Or we can only do three things with stress. What we can do with stress is we can express the stress, we can repress the stress, which means shoving it down, like bottling it up, or we can numb the stress, okay? So numbing, stress eating falls under the category of numbing the stress. It's, I'm gonna feel this emotion so that I don't feel the other emotion, right? This is where all vices come into play. This is where overeating comes into play, drugs come into play, alcohol comes into play, pornography comes into play, mindlessly scrolling on your phone at the end of the night comes into play. That's numbing. That's numbing the stress. If you repress the stress, that's ignoring it. That's pushing it down, pretending it's not there. That's when your wife asks you at the end of the day, hey, how was your day at work? And you're just like, it was fine. And she's like, oh, really? You seem like super upset. And you're like, no, it's no big deal, whatever. Like, I don't want to talk about it. That's repressing the stress. Now, that works for a short period of time, but if you bottle it up at some point, it's going to explode out. And if you're bottling it up, it's probably going to explode out at a time where you don't want it to, or in a way that's violent and harmful, right? Maybe literally violent and harmful. But this is when like you find yourself randomly yelling at your wife for no reason at the end of the day, and you're like, "What the heck?" And she's like, "Why? Wow! Like, how did we get here?" And you're like, "I'm so sorry. I've been stressed at work." Yeah, boom, you bottled it down. Now it exploded out, right? Or you find yourself yelling at your kids. Like, you can sort of repress it, but don't keep doing that forever. It's going to explode out, right? Yeah, not good. I've tried this. I've tested this, okay? I used to think that, oh, I don't need to express my stress. I can just handle it myself. And the way that that would blow up for me is I would unnecessarily get angry at Joey, my business partner, or I would go to jujitsu and literally like take out my stress on random, passerby new people at jujitsu, and I'd like basically try to fight them, and I would finish rolling with them being way unnecessarily mean, and just think like, why was I mean to that guy? Like there was no reason for me to do that. And I realized it's because I was bottling my stress, and then it was exploding out when I was in the middle of a roll of someone at jujitsu, and I was ruining someone's day. Um, yeah, funny stories there. But the first option, expressing the stress, is always the best. The reason that's always the best is because that's like getting it off our chest. That's what people mean when they say, I need to get this off my chest. It's, I need to express this stress, because if not, I'm going to ball it up or I'm going to numb it, right? Not good. And so you need to express the stress. And when a lot of men hear this, at least, if you're emotionally unavailable / unintelligent, it's going to sound soft / woo gooey, but maybe that's why you're numbing yourself with food, porn, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. So maybe you should have an open mind here. But I don't necessarily mean just like tell the world your feelings, or hire a therapist and just tell her your feelings. That is why people do it. That is why people find value in therapy. If you've never done it, it's because whether they know it's happening or not, that's their vehicle to express their stress. So they feel better when they just talk about it, right? So you can just express your stress, or you can express your stress to God. The Bible tells us to bring our worries and our concerns to Him. It literally tells us to do that. If you read the book of Psalms, that's David just like repeatedly lamenting, expressing his stress to God. He's talking about in all these Psalms like how scared he is, how tired he is, how, this is the worst and his life sucks, basically, right? Because he's being pursued by Saul and his armies. But you have to express your stress. Now, there's an important nuance when you express your stress that you want to make sure you're keeping in mind, so that it's not complaining, because complaining and only speaking negatively can actually be annoying. First of all, that's why like if your wife does this and she just dumps it all on you at the end of the day, and you don't want to hear it, this is what you sound like when you're complaining, right? So you want to make sure that you're not complaining, because complaining it's almost a form of ingratitude. It's like you're acknowledging all the negative, and when you're complaining, you're by definition not acknowledging what God has given you, the goodness of God. And so it's the opposite of gratitude. It's actually a form of ungodly speech. Complaining is a form of ungodly speech. The Bible says we're not to partake in ungodly speech. But what you want to do when you're expressing your stress, whatever vehicle you choose, whether that's like in, guys do it with us in DK in their private VIP chats, or even in the community or on calls, or with a therapist or with just your wife or a friend or somebody you trust, is you want to always end on a positive note, because that takes it from complaining to lamenting. That takes it from complaining to lamenting. Lamenting is actually what David was doing in the book of Psalms. Because if you read all of those Psalms, he'll start off with the concern, right, the stressors, but he'll always end on a positive note. The Psalms all go something like, this is really bad. This really hurts. My bones ache. I'm crying all day, but God, I know you're good. God, I know you defeat my enemies. God, I know that you sustain me. It always ends with a positive. So that's how you change the expression from complaining to lamenting. And lamenting is actually a form of expression that helps you deal with that negative emotion. I think that that's the only way David was able to make it through the stressful scenario that he was going through, being pursued and persecuted. I think the only way he was able to get through that was his expression, his psalms, his lamenting. He was telling God how pissed he was, but still acknowledging that God was good. And so he was able to get through that, right? So that's very important. That's one of the ways that you can immediately decrease that negative emotion. And if you do this, 100% test it, 100% you will have less cravings. 100%. If you just got out of a hard day and you're on your way home from work and you want to grab a burger, you're getting freaking, cravings, call someone you trust, call someone you know, and be like, just call them and talk to them and be like, dude, honestly, it's been hard, it's been challenging, but, I'm grateful because, my family's healthy. Whatever it is, guaranteed those cravings will go away. Guaranteed, right? Guaranteed. The way I also like to put this is like, it's impossible for you to dishonor the temple of God as you're actively being grateful for it or expressing gratitude for it, right? Like, it's also impossible to cheat on your wife as you're actively telling her how much you love her, like in the same exact moment, okay? And maybe that's an extreme, but the point is that if you lament and end on the positive, your cravings will go away. You'll literally, as it says in Philippians, that if you bring those concerns, those petitions to God with prayer and thanksgiving, end it with the thanksgiving, the positive, you'll experience the peace that transcends all understanding. That's what the Bible says, right? And so that's what I recommend in order to decrease that stress. The other things you can do are you can also make sure that you're overly full. Okay, you're overly full, just so that you don't, because something that can come up is you can literally experience emotional, like negative emotions, because you have a negative association with hunger. Okay, so if you're telling yourself the wrong story about hunger and you're like, I can't be hungry, I can't be hungry, I can't be hungry, then you start to freak out and get stressed out, and then you want to eat. But that, like, you can prevent that by being overfull. So make sure you're eating enough lean protein. Make sure that you are drinking water. And when you do these things, you'll actually secrete a different hormone called leptin. Leptin is the I'm full hormone. That's actually a hormone that it literally makes food look unappetizing. Okay, and so even if you're kind of having a little bit of cravings, the food itself looks unappetizing because you're so full that you can't even imagine eating it. So that's something you can do as well. And yeah, there's a lot here. The other thing, and what I think is the most important thing you can and should do, is because cravings stem from you needing a reward or a sense of reward in some point, you want to change what you perceive as a reward. Change what you perceive as a reward. Because right now we perceive the food as a reward. We perceive the food as a reward, right? So that's what we crave, quote unquote. But what if you convinced yourself that working out is a reward? Then what you would crave if you're stressed is a workout. You want to go hit the gym, right? Now we're kind of starting to get somewhere here, right? You're not just replacing the craving. You're not just numbing the craving. You're actually changing what you perceive as a reward, so you're changing what you crave. Right? This is where things get really crazy. This is where when people start diets, they start to say, like, actually, healthy food is starting to taste better to me. That's because you are perceiving the healthy food as rewarding, right? You see the direct correlation between eating healthier and being able to take your shirt off at the beach while feeling confident. You perceive that as the reward. So that's what you begin to seek, right? You start to perceive being able to take your shirt off with your wife and, go to town with confidence and having her look at you, like actually excited about what she sees. as a reward. So therefore, that's what you start to seek. You don't start to seek hitting snooze. You don't start to seek skipping a workout and watching football for 3 hours on Sunday. Sorry, but you don't start to seek the things that hurt you. You start to seek the things that help you. That's where it really starts in the mind, right? That's where when the Bible says we're going to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, you can be transformed by changing what you yourself perceive as a reward. So that's why, like, I literally am happy. I'm so glad when I get to eat healthy and when I hit my workouts, because I perceive that as reward and I see the reward it brings me. I know that working out makes me healthier long term, so I'll be here for my family. I know that it gives me more energy for my business, so I'll be able to grow my business. I know that it sets the example for the people I'm called to lead, so I'll be able to impact people and grow the Default King's mission. I perceive the things that help me. I perceive healthy things as rewarding, and I perceive unhealthy things as unrewarding. So even when I do have those negative emotions and I start to crave reward, I seek out healthy things, right? And that's really how you mega frame destroy your cravings, is you actually convince yourself, you come into agreement with the fact that it's the healthy things that are rewarding and not the hyperpalatable high calorie foods that are unhealthy. So that is it. If you do this, I literally guarantee you will overcome your unhealthy cravings. And if you cannot wrap your mind around this, if you need help with this, just go to defaultkings.com. There's more info about how we help people do this one-on-one there. That's it.